Okay. So, hello everyone, and welcome to EIPIP meeting number 27. The first item on the agenda is the EIP GitHub repo action bot. Pooja, you said you have a small update because I don't think Alita's here.
Yeah, considering the issue with the present EIP bot, the EIPIP group discussed to address this by possibly having another bot. And Ethereum cat herders are funding the effort, and Alita Mood from the team is working on it. I guess she made some progress. As far as I know, she had some questions related to testing. But unfortunately, I don't see her on the call today. So maybe I would ask her to get in touch with Micah if that is fine. And yes, we can get it done like offline.
Okay, sounds good. All right, the next item is progress on the content for the ETH 1.0 spec repo, including JSON RPC and network upgrade pages.
So the Ethereum, we are trying to add some useful resources to Ethereum 1.0 spec repo. And I believe James is taking care of that. Maybe adding the previous network upgrades and some specs. I have just one small update on JSON RPC side that ECH is organizing a PEEP meeting for EIP 1474 remote procedure call specification on March 17th with Eric Marks and Maurice Van, where we are trying to provide the overview of the proposal and how the implementation is done, because many people had questions on that particular proposal, helping out with this just an RP spec. So if people are interested, please feel free to join us on March 17th.
All right, great. Item number 3 is the relationship between the ETH1 and ETH2 specs. I think that's something that Danny put on the agenda and wanted to talk about today with the merge coming up and things like that.
Yeah.
So, Danny, if you want to kind of talk about what you had in mind for the discussion today, and we can chime in.
So, as you know, largely we've done specification writing in an independent repo called the ETH2O specs repo. And moving forward, we are beginning to write specs that have a tighter relationship to existing specifications, things that we normally call ETH1 specifications. And just for some context, the way that we're currently writing specifications and currently prototyping things is essentially take ETH1, subtract out proof of work, add ETH2 as consensus layer, and you have specifications. Obviously, we did 2982 at the end of last year, which was met with some contention from EIP editors as to whether that actually made sense to tie like the ETH2O specs repo into the EIPs that way in an informational spec. And I just want to pick your brains, get some advice, get some thoughts on how best to do this, because the specifications moving forward look like modifications to the consensus layer, proof of stake consensus layer specifications in the ETH2O repo, and linking somehow into the application layer specifications, which is largely like what we call ETH1, largely exists in EIPs. I know there's also the yellow paper. I know there's also this 1.0 specs repo on releases. And there's a lot of moving parts, and it's not clear how to, it's clear in my mind how to link them together technically, but not necessarily practically from like a specification and maintenance standpoint. So I just wanted to see if y'all had any ideas, and I don't suspect we necessarily would decide today, but I just wanted to put it out there.
So I guess my first thought is, what is the way that we can do this that best signifies that this is a single Ethereum? Because I think that's really important to make sure that we don't frame this. Well, it's already kind of I think misnomer might be the right word, that ETH2 is like totally separate from ETH1, or like is a whole new thing and ETH1's deprecated, more so than this merge that we're kind of developing a new narrative for. So I think that's an important aspect. I also think that it might be hard to answer how it should come together until we figure out how best to organize ETH1 stuff and get that complete. Because from last I heard, and someone might be able to answer me, the yellow paper is not updated. The EIP's repo is still looking for more editors, and the ETH1 spec repo still doesn't have all of the things it wants in it yet, including previous network upgrade information and some other stuff like the JSON RPC spec.
Help me understand the ETH10 spec repo. Is that primarily what it does is it takes like a bundling of EIPs and says like this is essentially a release and specifies them as such?
That is part of it, yes. So it used to be when you go to the EIP repo, you would have you would have meta EIPs for like Homestead and all those other ones. And that would really conflate a standards process with a release process, including stuff like having final and EIPs mean it's in a fork when you're talking about core EIPs. So we've changed up some of the terminology and also tried to separate out the standards from the non-standard stuff, including network upgrades, to make it a little bit easier. I think Micah was a big driver of that, so he might be able to give a little more color as to why that happened.
Interesting. So in my mind, and maybe not in the mind of everyone, but what we call ETH1 is more like in a merge world, ETH1 minus proof of work is like the application layer, and ETH2 is the kind of consensus layer, the cradle for the application layer. And maybe the linkage is actually between these two spec repos, in that when once there's a merge, there's kind of things are released in tandem, where the application layer is at this point and the consensus layer is at this point, and they're tied together through essentially on the consensus layer. There's like a function call into the application layer, but it might be very clean. It also there might be more than one tie, and it might be dirty, and we might just kind of see how it lands. So that's one possibility, so tie them through these two repos instead of through the EIPs like I tried at the end of last year. But I'm definitely open to thoughts and ideas here.
So my initial thought with the process that would result in the least change to the process would be that anything that needs to happen for the merge that would go into an ETH1 client would go through the EIP process. So any changes that ETH1 clients need to make prior to the merge. And then once the merge happens, at that point, any changes to either ETH1 clients or ETH2 clients would go through the EIP process. So basically, the ETH2 clients would join the EIP process as of the merge.
So
until the merge, EIP process is for.
Right, I see that. So in that sense, the ETH2 specs become something like the yellow paper, as in like the foundation before it started, and it can still be maintained in tandem, but iterative stuff should probably go through the EIP process. I see that.
Does ETH2 have an improvement proposal process?
No, it's quick and dirty. Kind of by design, things move very quickly and rapidly, and we do have kind of rough consensus in the specs repo and what gets built by clients and released. But the plan is certainly to refine that into a point in which that it unifies with the ETH1.0 development process at the merge. So it does not have a formal process right now. And that's also one of the reasons I'm chatting here, is that it certainly should have a formal process at some point in its lifetime. And that is certainly at or before the merge.
So from where I see this, like kind
so,
of.
Just to be clear, I am not necessarily.
I think Micah might have a delay. Go ahead, Pooja.
Okay. So from where I was looking at this ETH1 and ETH2 merge process, I consider this like to be in like 3 phases. If we divide it, that would be helpful for both of us, from the ETH1 client perspective and maybe from the ETH2 client perspective. Something is like pre-merge stage, hypothetically, like if this merge has to happen like in like next 15 months by the summer of 2022. So we have this pre-merge phase. So we have to work on the proposals that is needed for the E2 merge later on. Preparing for the merge would be like next stage and post merge. So from my understanding, at least one of the ETH1 upgrade we are seeing that is definitely before the merge. Okay. And if we consider that to happen before August, we might want to focus on the proposal sides, like which proposal would be, if at all, that would be needed for the ETH2 merge. And then for while preparing for the ETH2, whatever proposal we could not consider, and we find that these are useful and that would be needed, or maybe helping out in like whatever the shifting of brain from ETH1 to ETH2 would be required, we can look into that. The third part, the post merge, is something from my perspective are more important for researchers to figure out what is needed in ETH1 client at the end of the day. And this will drive the first and the second phases. So what I was trying to mention here is like, if we would like to consider this merge process, not the process of the overall Ethereum chain running, but what we are expecting from Ethereum 1.0 client, maybe we have to figure out what ETH2 needs from us, as that was mentioned in the last All Core Day meeting.
Right. Yeah, and so there's two parallel things happening here. There's the practical standpoint of like communication and coordination between these two pieces of software, and then there's also the how do we write it down and where do we write it down, and there's interplay there certainly. And Tim and I and others are going to work on the practical component of like what actually we plan on producing a document the next week or so that says like these are all the things that actually need to happen, at least from the best of our understanding right now. And we have a relatively clear path on how to begin to integrate those onto the consensus layer side, on the 2.0 side, in terms of specification. And then we need to think about how to integrate them on the other side. And I think a number of these things can show up as EIPs, but contextually the EIPs need so like, for example, the change of the difficulty opcode. That's essentially like bricked in a proof of stake context, and you need to decide what it returns in that context, because there's legacy contracts that use it. But if we just write an EIP that says brick the difficulty opcode, it needs the context of proof of stake, because otherwise it looks like a pretty silly EIP. And so at that point, I mean, we can point back to the 2.0 specs repo, which works, but there's also, I don't know, we need to figure out that process. And Mike, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
So just sounds like you're back, yeah.
Just to be clear, what I proposed before I got disconnected wasn't necessarily my preference, just that was the process that was closest to what we have today. Regarding your question on linking to ETH2 specs repo, so I have a pretty strong policy, as anyone who watches the EIP's repo would know, against linking outside of the ETH2 repo. And the reason for that is because for any sort of long-lived document repository, links will all eventually 404. Any links that is outside of your page is going to 404. And with a single editor, I cannot keep up with the 1,000 things at 404 every day. That being said, I also recognize that it's unreasonable to say, okay, you need to define all of ETH2 specs in the EIP's repository. Like, that's insane. And so I don't have a great solution. I think we might just have to accept that we're going to have broken links at some point, and that we just make an exception in this one case. I wish there was a better answer.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of maintenance, and if we presume that the merge happens and the ETH2 specs become canonical consensus proof of stake consensus specs and are used in mainnet Ethereum, there's less of a chance. I mean, there's definitely a chance that links break. But if we're pointing to like specific releases on that repo, you know, those that are maintaining the 2 specs repo and those that are maintaining relevant EIPs certainly have more of an overlap. And so that there's probably less chance that it becomes like kind of an external repo that just, or an external link that just dies. But I mean, I agree with you that there's fundamentally kind of an issue there, and makes relevant EIPs brittle. So, I mean, one other potential way to do this, no, I need to think about it. Does the EIP repo link to the yellow paper?
No, for basically the same reason. I mean, the class of problems that I'm worried about with the ETH2 specs repo is less that, oh, what if ETH2 specs, what if we don't go to ETH2? It's more like, what happens when GitHub starts censoring people and everybody moves to GitLab? And now the ETH2 specs is not github.com/ETH2 specs, it's now gitlab.com/ETH2 specs. And then 6 months later, they join the bandwagon, and we move to some random dark web onion linked site or IPFS.
Like, and each time you're not only moving a repo, but you're moving 2, and there's interconnections between them.
Yeah. So again, in this one case, maybe this is a special enough case it's worth it. Going forward, like long term, and this gets back to what I was saying, that I don't necessarily think the EIP's process is the best process for ETH2. It might be better and would address this if instead of having EIP process that then adjusts a spec that lives somewhere else, like right now the EIP process kind of technically adjusts the yellow paper. Since you guys already have all your stuff in GitHub, it might make more sense to have your change control process be pull requests against that. So that way it's all in one place. And
I was thinking about that, maybe
cross links.
Yeah, maybe the EIP core specs or core EIPs end up being application layer core EIPs, and the consensus ends up being like a slightly different process, or at least lives in a slightly different place. Tell me this, and I believe I know the answer, but the sum total of core EIPs on, or at least like deployed core EIPs, is not the entire Ethereum protocol, right? It assumes the yellow paper. Correct. And then is modifications on top. Okay.
Optimistically, yes. I think it assumes the yellow paper plus modifications on top and some other stuff mixed in that wasn't documented.
Yeah, I understand. If there was a more maintained yellow paper and somebody doing that, would that change the way the relationship with like the EIP core EIPs and the ETH10 specs repo and stuff, or is that, do you consider just kind of independent at this point?
I would like that. Like, I would love it if instead of the yellow paper, we had a specs repo like you guys have for ETH2, and we had it for ETH1 and actually documented the current protocol fully. And then from there, we could then do PRs against that as either as part of the EIP process or just replace the EIP process with direct PRs to the spec. The reason I haven't pushed on that or even proposed it really is because that's a pretty big change, and it's hard enough getting one opcode removed, nonetheless changing the entire process.
So I recommend you speak with Paul D. I can't remember his last name.
Durowski?
Yes. Paul is, sorry, cat. Paul is has a lot of familiarity with the WASM spec, which has a written spec and an accompanying code spec that, like, kind of line by line is very literally an implementation of the written spec. And he is talking about doing that for the yellow paper and updating the yellow paper. And such a executable spec along with a written spec might change the way the possibilities of doing here. Obviously, there's a lot of unknowns there. One, will it be done? Two, who's maintaining it? All of that. But it might be worthwhile for one of y'all to reach out to Paul to get a handle on what he's attempting to do and whether that's relevant to the EIP stuff. So let's do this. We can talk about this as much as y'all want to, but I will say I won't drop an EIP like we did at the end of last year without chatting with y'all. And as the specs are written on the 2.0 side, and we're trying to formalize how to do the same on the 1.0 side. I'll keep the conversation open so we can end up in a reasonable place with as few of brittle links as possible.
Yeah, if I had my way today and we had to make a decision, I'd go with what Micah called the easy path, or the path that like we're kind of set up for today, which is the ETH2 repo does the spec all the way up to the merge, and then they start filing EIPs after that. That sounds like what we're set up for today.
Yeah, I'd say barring some other decision or like reasonable path that emerges, or maybe reformulation of EIP stuff, then I think that by default would make sense. The one problem is there's two major things that we want to do with the beacon chain. One is merge the Ethereum application layer into it, and the other is sharding. Iterative work on the consensus layer after the merge that didn't include sharding would probably be pretty simply to be able to be done in EIPs. But post that, but in addition to that, there's the sharding work, which would be a little bit more major scaffolding work, and might be more difficult to do in the context of an EIP, but we can address that when we get there, I suppose.
We can just call it ETH3 and
another spec repo. And I
that's
think,
right. ETH 3.0 specs done.
I think what we want to, I think a good goal for when we're figuring this out though is to make sure that ETH2 stuff feels comfortable rolling into EIPs. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. Like,
right.
We don't want this to be a hindrance, I guess. Like,
right.
let's acquiesce a little.
Yeah, as I said, doing an EIP kind of specifying qualitatively and quantitatively to a certain extent what a modification that would be done to the E2 specs repo is reasonable, but at the same time, we're going to do an accompanying PR in the E2 specs repo because there's executable specification that builds tests. And so even if we do move into do iterative work in the EIP stuff, it will always be accompanied, at least for the foreseeable future, with executable spec modifications, so then we're maintaining things in two places, which isn't crazy. I mean, that's the idea of the yellow paper is that you're maintaining things in two places. Micah, sorry, I think you're lagging, but what'd you say?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying I'm not a fan of maintaining information in two places.
Yeah, my understanding of the yellow paper is that it's a user readable version of what's in the EIPs combined with the E2 spec. The E2 spec, or I mean the ETH1 spec and the EIPs. And then if you combine that together, that's the canonical definition of Ether. And all the yellow paper is a user readable stuff. And in my understanding, it's a type of wiki system where people can contribute, but it never is up to date. And some of the new stuff that gets accepted into EIPs. And so it should be recognized as not canonical, but up to date as much as possible.
Right. So, I mean, in that sense, Micah, to that end, if we do want to maintain this thing, the executable E2 spec in a different place, to be able to build tests, then that would point to potentially not doing the iterative EIP thing and having a different change process more closely tied to those.
Yeah, and that would lead to the other thing I suggested, where we have EIPs would be for changes to the ETH1 clients even after the merge, so like the application layer as you called it, and then you guys would have a separate process, likely a pull request process for changes to the consensus. Of course, then there's still that interconnect, and I think we just might have to live with crosslinks forever. Unless at some point in the future we can have just an Ethereum specs repo that has executable code for application and consensus layer, which would be awesome, but I don't know how realistic that is. And so we should probably have a plan for that doesn't happen.
This would also be a good opportunity for those who want to do this, and I'm not in that camp, but I know people have been yelling about this for a while, to separate the EIP's repo between ERCs and EIPs. So there would be a new repo. I don't know. Were you a proponent of that, Micah? I forgot.
I think I'm the only proponent, I believe. I'm just loud enough about it that it sounds like 10 people.
Okay, that might be it. But yeah, I think that this would be the opportunity, the only opportunity, if we were to do this after merge, to separate the EIP's repo between ERCs and EIPs, and then that new fresh start would enable us to do all ETH2 and ETH1 related core consensus application protocol work in one repo, and then ERCs in the other.
Yeah, I would love that very much, because I could just quit reading ERCs and I would stop hating my life.
Yeah.
You don't
Okay,
want
so
to read the new upgradable smart contract protocol?
Oh my God, I do not want to read the latest upgradable smart contract protocol. Or the 10th latest or whatever we're up to.
Yeah.
I think the one problem you might run into is that I suspect if we do this, what will happen is no one will be an editor for the ERC's repo. Like, the only reason I'm an editor for it is because it's currently bundled in and I feel obliged to respond to them. As soon as you split it off, I literally will just stop reviewing ERCs entirely because I hate them. And I will only review core EIPs, and then I suspect no one will take up the stead. I'm okay with this, but just be aware of what will likely happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so it sounds like where we're at is, if default happens and we don't have more of these meetings as things get closer, it would be spec repo, or the specification repo for ETH2 continues on, and then they start doing EIPs after the merge, and then we figure out something for sharding later.
Which Micah was slightly against, yeah.
Yeah, I would say the default should be that application layer does EIPs and consensus layer does whatever their process is, probably pull requests. And then if someone comes up with a reason not to do that, then we have a backup plan of, at the merge, have the ETH2 specs go to EIPs, I guess, the secondary.
The release, in that world, the release of a merge fork or more merge release would be a 1.0 release tied to a 2.0 release and showing the connection between the two. Essentially, like the modifications to the application layer and the modifications to the consensus layer.
Yeah, and looking at it, like, I'm thinking about what changes we have to the consensus layer currently in ETH1 world, and there's not many.
None.
Is there going to be that many in ETH2?
Yeah, difficulty bombs.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody wants to propose a difficulty bomb, then that would, like, validator rewards would, like, drop to 0 or something like that.
Damn those validators.
The idea is to have very few, right? Like, I think that there's a lot more moving pieces in the proof of stake mechanism than the proof of work mechanism. And so I would expect, certainly over the next 12 months, some refinement. There's some refinement expected to go out this summer. So I can't say for sure, but that'd be great if it was largely stable, and then we can get back to application layer modifications.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. And I hope more people, as things get closer to the merge, will get more involved in a meeting like this.
Yeah.
Because I think we just need more people thinking on this for different ideas. And yeah, it's unfortunate there wasn't as many people on today, but let's definitely bring this up again at a future EIPIP meeting. And hopefully by then we'll have a few other things solved, like more editors onboarded, and things will be cleaned up a bit more, so that, I mean, I'm hopeful, but there's no indication that's happening. but I'm still hopeful that we'll have more editors and things like that, so we can have things cleaned up a little more and, like, have a better, clear distinction in what the ETH 1.0 spec repo becomes.
Okay, and we're moving forward on some 2.0 merge specs that begin to kind of dictate some of the the changes in the ETH1 layer, and we'll kind of just have them written down, and we'll figure out over the next handful of months where to formally write them down.
Yeah, another default's going to be the linking between the ETH1 EIPs, like the difficulty
Right.
opcode stuff, and linking that to reasoning at an ETH2 repo. That's like, I think that is what has to happen. I can't think of an alternative unless we start including more documentation in the EIP repo itself.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that either. I would say for Danny, just as much as possible, limit the cross links. Like try to where it's reasonable, try to include the information necessary in the EIP itself. Like don't just be like this hash code now does this, and it's just a link. Like try as much as possible to actually specify as much as you can, and then maybe have like one link for additional information to the reader.
I can provide the context verbally, like in the context of a movement to prove a stake, like this is a modification of the difficulty opcode to be this instead of the previous proof of work context. And I can say that all verbally. I don't have to even point to an external link, but it's at least contextualized by something that is not in the EIP repo.
Yeah, I'm willing to let it slide in this case because this is special. The reason I have this personal rule is because I get ERCs that have just like links to people's personal GitHub accounts, and they're like, go here for all the details of this spec.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, that sounds good.
That all seems reasonable, and I will attempt to be very reasonable as we move forward, and I will keep the dialogue open.
Yeah, Mike, I like how you say this is an exception, like this isn't a huge deal. Like ETH2 is like a, let's equate ERCs.
I guess I will let you, because I like you. It's one time.
This is one time. Yeah,
I won't let anyone know that you compromised here.
I'm sure it's going to end up all over the internet. I'm sure on Twitter it'll be like, "Oh, Mike is being unfairly. He's friends with Danny." And
they're going to say, Micah lets people do external links now, and it's going to be a free for all.
Oh my God! I'm already in my life.
Yeah, get your hexagon upgrade contracts ready for your external links. Anyways, what, Brent?
Yeah, I just have a personal opinion on fear of external links and 401 errors. To me, everything should be done in a wiki way, leaderless way. Like, for example, right now we've got eip.ethereum.org and ethereum.org/EIPs, and we're proposing moving the ethereum.org/EIPs over to eips.ethereum.org, and that's going to break a few links. And so I would like to take on the responsibility to track down those links and get them fixed ourselves, because Micah mentioned the bottleneck process. He can't keep up with all the links and keep them all fixed. But if you put it on the leaderless bottom-up way, so when someone moves a page, they should be able to go out and find all the links and make the changes from that end when you, so that we're not bottlenecked by anything, and everything can be done by anyone. But anyway, just a thought.
Yeah. I mean, I like it in theory. In practice, it's a long-tail distribution on who fixes links.
Yeah. It does give me one idea, though. In theory, EIP's specs repo, ETH2 specs repo is currently a GitHub repository, right? Like just markdown files in GitHub. Mm-hmm. Hypothetically, we could include it as a submodule in the EIP's repo, and that way we can link internally.
Right. And an EIP that modified the consensus layer could also modify the would actually modify, like actually do the code modification as well, or a pull request.
Yeah, like that could work.
That's an idea. That's an idea. Well, that tightly couples EIPs with what actually is implemented, right?
Yeah, and that's like what part of why I'm a little meh on it. I mean, some modules in general are a bit hellish to maintain and deal with.
Well, and it's not impossible because we have that for ETH 1.0 with the Jello paper. Or was it the beige? No, the Jello paper or the beige paper?
Yeah, the Jello paper is like Jello paper is a K specification of, I think, primarily the EVM. It doesn't have all the Cradle components like the proof of work and stuff. And I don't know if that's actually very maintainable. The Jello paper owners claim that it's very maintainable, but it's very dense to read, in my opinion.
All of my code is very maintainable. No one else's is.
So
Yeah.
I would say I would encourage one of you to hit up Paul D to hear about what he's working on like an executable spec accompanying with some yellow paper updates. Which, if we had an executable spec kind of both layers, then we can start to do some pretty interesting things. Maybe and putting that in like the 1.0 specs repo, and there can be some interplay between the two there. Okay.
Yeah, we need to just throw money at someone to maintain the yellow paper, I think. Just get it up to speed before the merge.
Yeah, you gotta find the right someone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're good with this topic unless anyone has any final stuff. Okay, well, thanks so much, Danny.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah,
we'll have
I'll
another.
talk to you all soon.
Yeah, we'll have another one of these eventually. Bye.
Cool.
Unless you want to stay, whatever you want to do.
I'm out later.
All right, see you. Next up, we have EIP editors onboarding and request for funding. I don't have an update for that, so we can go to the next thing. Oh, actually, no, we do have an update for that. We have a blog, don't we?
Right. So after the release of the blog, Become an Editor, we have been approached by a few people from the community. Those are interested in being editor and they have questions on the process part and if this position is compensated, etc. I wanted to bring this to the meeting to get clarity on the onboarding process, as how we can screen the application, maybe whom could we send candidates to, or like how do we want to proceed with this particular onboarding process for EIP editors?
I think me and Micah and the Light client can just talk to them.
Okay. So like what would be the best place where we can send like any group or I don't know.
How many people are there that came to you?
At least 3, but those are like coming directly from community. What we are doing as a first screening part, asking them to fill up their onboarding form for Ethereum cat herders so that we can get to know about them a little bit more, if they have any association with Ethereum or not, and some from references, etc.
Micah, where's your preferred place to be discussing with these people? Like either the EIP's chat and ETH R&D Discord, the cat herders chat and Discord, or a Telegram group? What do you like?
Anything in Discord is good for me.
Okay. Pooja, do you have a place that you think would be best? Maybe the cat herders Discord?
Yeah, mostly people are showing up in cat herders Discord because that is mentioned in the blog that reach out to cat herders. So possibly I would create a separate channel providing access to Micah, Light Client, and you, and we will send the candidates over there.
And if you make that channel, remind me to turn on notifications for it because I'm really bad at that. So in fact, I'm going to change my notification settings for the cat herders channel after this call because I think they got muted automatically when I joined and I don't want that to happen.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, definitely. So there is already a channel of EIP where Alita is throwing some, stuff for the bot one. But I'm gonna, do we want to have a separate channel for EIP editors, or we can continue the discussion over there because everything is going for the EIP depot only there?
I'm okay with having the same channel.
That's good. Okay, then I'll reach out to Light Client and Micah and get them added over there.
Perfect.
So one question I have, maybe someone else can ask of all of the applicants, is why in the hell would you want to work for free on editing EIPs? Anyone who wants to edit EIPs, I'm very suspicious of, which I know I shouldn't be, since that would make me suspicious of me, but I am very suspicious of me too. Like, I don't know why you guys trust me. You shouldn't.
They probably are asking about compensation, which isn't happening yet, but if they're still like, I'm willing to wait for that, or like, I'll come back when we have compensation, that'd be fine too. We can still vet them beforehand or get to know them. That's not a negative thing to start to vet.
Like,
yeah.
If that was someone's answer, like, why do you want to do this? And they said, well, I need a job, I'd be totally fine with it. I just worry about anybody who's like, oh yeah, I'd love to do EIP editing. Like,
yeah.
No one says that.
Yeah, no one says that.
Yeah, we receive these queries like if this job is compensated. I already have informed people that at the moment it is not, but we are considering some options to get provide funding to this particular role. And yeah, obviously, if they would want to consider it now or maybe come back later, it's fine. But yes, of course, I can.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely trust someone who likes money more than I trust someone who doesn't.
Nice. Okay. That's good for, is that all you needed for that item, Pooja?
Yeah.
Next up, single source of truth for EIP. I forgot what this item was for.
Yeah, I'm working on that.
Oh, that's the one you mentioned earlier. Okay. Yeah. So no real big updates there.
Yeah, I had a great last meeting we talked. Micah had the idea of removing meta information in the EIP repository, like EIP1, out of the repository, and so I included that idea in the proposal that I'm doing. And the next step, I think, is to create a and we want to move that into eips.ethereum.org. And so I think the next step is we need to set up some kind of staging area where we can build a new version of Ethereum or eips.ethereum.org. And I asked Pooja before the meeting who's responsible for that. It sounds like AXIC is, and so I'm going to reach out to AXIC to find out if there already is a staging area. Great. If not, I'll look towards seeing what is required to set one up like that and push in that direction. But that's just an update of where I'm going and what I'm going to do next.
Now, when you say move out EIP1, do you mean move it out of the repo into a website?
Well, right now when we made the changes to the EIP process, all of the new updates got made to EIP1, and right now that's the canonical set of staging of where the canonical information is. And last meeting, Micah proposed moving that out of there and moving that someplace onto eip.ethereum.org. And so I added that proposal, and I think that's a great idea, specifically since it needs to take some of the workload off of EIP editors and stuff like that. And so I've assumed that's okay. It sounds like you might have a problem with that. Is that the case?
I more just want to understand it before I have a problem with it or not. Because like, if it's, so it wouldn't be a meta EIP anymore. It would just be a rule set then that we just keep up with.
And we would define the canonical meta EIP information somewhere on eip.ethereum.org. And that's why I want to set up a staging area where we can move all that and get all that set up and get it, because right now it is EIP1 that is the canonical stuff, but we want to get a staging area set up and get everyone on board and say, yes, that's sufficient. We can switch over from EIP1 being the canonical source to this new source when we make it live. But anyway, Micah, do you have anything you want to tell him about why we would want to do that?
I try to keep the EIP's repo focused on EIP standards. And right now, the EIP1 talks about stuff that's not directly related to standardization, like why. Like pull it up real quick so I can remind myself. Like, for example, right at the top, what is an EIP? EIP rationale, talks about the EIP workflow, what belongs in a successful EIP. Like, this all feels like the workflow probably is fine to stay. But like the what belongs in a successful EIP feels more like a tutorial or like a blog post or something that's kind of, this isn't a spec, this is just like some helpful information for newcomers. And currently, that type of information is spread out in multiple places. And I feel like rather than putting more stuff into EIP1, instead we can take some stuff out of EIP1 and have EIP1 focus purely on this is the process. Like these are the requirements. Like it's basically a standard for EIPs. Like EIP1 becomes an EIP in it. Like, I guess really what I'm trying to say is EIP1 is a technical standard. Right now, it is a technical standard with a whole lot of non-standard information, like non-normative information in it. And I would like to pull out some of that non-normative information and put it somewhere else.
As long as someone is putting something somewhere else, I'm okay with that. So like if we have a blog or two prepared or an article or what Brent's coming up with, as long as that's prepared for when that happens, then I think I'm okay with it.
Okay. Yeah, the idea is we would take the information that's currently there and then move it over to ethereum.org and then delete it from EIP1 after it's moved. So not that we delete it first and then maybe later we'll add it somewhere else. It's definitely a migration. So we're moving the content to a new location.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on this. Like, I'd probably, if I had to choose, I'd probably keep it the way it was for simplicity. But like, at the same time, I see your points, and that sounds good to me. This could also start the thing where it's like less opinionated on how to do stuff, and more just like you said, a technical specification on the process itself.
Yeah, that's what I would like. Looking through it, like as an example, there's a history section in EIP1 that talks about Bitcoin's BIP process, and that really, in my opinion, doesn't belong in a technical spec for how to build an EIP. That's like history, and it's interesting and is useful. I feel like the Ethereum.org, which already has a whole bunch more of that type of information, is a better place for it, like the why and the history and the stuff like that.
Cool.
Okay. So do you think like the map of states that says what states EIPs go through, does that go in there?
That's technical, I think.
Yeah, I think that's technical. Like basically anything that I, as an editor, would refer to and say, hey, you're not following the standard, point back to EIP1. So like if someone tries to go from draft to final, I would point to EIP1 and say, that's not allowed. See here.
Oh, okay.
So if it's, whereas I'm never going to point to someone and say, hey, look at the history and of the Bitcoin process, like as a reason to reject their EIP. So if something is like a specification or a standard or like a requirement for the process, then I would say EIP1. And if it's more just metadata about the process or description of why we have this, or where the history of it, stuff like that, that would be moved over to Ethereum.org.
I was a little bit unclear on that, but I understand. That makes a lot more sense now. Okay, I'll update the information. Keep on moving forward with that.
I mean, there's the other option, and I'm not against this, not for it. Just to throw it out there, which is to just get rid of EIP1 and just put everything somewhere else.
Yeah, that's kind of the way
I was
not a huge fan
of that.
Initially starting, but if we don't want to go that far yet, then I would like to know.
I mean, I'm okay with that. It does mean there's just one less place that people have to know to look for things. Like it consolidates information. So I'm not against just pulling the whole thing out. I don't know how other people feel.
Right, but I think we should have a very clear location, whether it's EIP1, where these are the states EIP go through, and this is the process you do to migrate from one step to the other. And it doesn't need to be in EIP1, but if that's where we want, but we should, and I was proposing moving that exactly thing so that every time you want, so Mike had to say you're not following this, he would point to wherever that location is. And I thought we were moving that EIP.ethereum.org, but maybe
it's entirely possible. I proposed that last time and I have just forgotten and changed my mind. That does sound like something I would say.
Okay, so which way? So have you changed your mind, and should I back off a little bit on that, or?
No, like the more you talk about it, the more I think that would be nice.
Yeah. I think I like that idea because the EIP repository is where we want to have the ether spec, and we eventually want to have the canonical ether spec stuff, and have some kind of automated process where that's the canonical ether spec, and all that meta information should be moved out of that. So I like that idea. But anyway, so are we still going with completely moving? But again, before we make that move, we've got to have the staging area, and we've got to have everything built and say this is where we want the new stuff to be, and it has to be sufficient for Micah and Hudson and everyone, Ether and Pooja and everyone. Make sure we have, okay, yeah, everyone's happy with that. Now we can throw the switch. So that's what my proposal is. We need to start building a staging area where we can start building that and moving everything out and moving in that direction.
Yeah. So you're going to make a proposal for that as next steps, I think.
Yeah, that's my proposal here and I'm going to start on that next.
What are your feelings, Hudson? Do you think just pulling all of EIP1 out into Ethereum.org so we have just a single page that just has history and process and everything?
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion because like I see the pros and a little bit of the cons, because like the cons, mainly the number one con in my head is like there is now information in two places or more that people have to go look. So like I might need to go read a blog, read ethereum.org, and read EIP1 to get the technical, non-technical, and recommended.
Right, and that seems to me to argue that we should just pull all of EIP1 out and put it on ethereum.org along with So all the information is in one place, both the process description
Yes.
and the process history and the process metadata, et cetera. Yeah, if everybody else is fine with that, I'm totally fine with it.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, we can pull it all out. That sounds good to me.
Okay, I'm back in that direction. I'll push in that direction. Thanks so much for your help.
Just remind me I said this next week when I say it's a bad idea.
Okay, well, I was wondering if I just didn't hear you right, so thanks.
Hey, you probably did. I learned the other day my brain is full. I asked them a question, and like 5 minutes later, they gave me an answer, and I was like, "Oh, that answer has pushed out the question," and I no longer remember what I asked because the answer replaced it.
That's great. Okay, cool.
Not for me.
So anyways, if we're done with that, the last item is reviewing previous meeting action items. So the first one is complete transfer of EIP bot to GitHub Actions. That's still ongoing. 26.2 is Brent to open a PR to the EIP's repo. That's still ongoing. We just talked about that. Editor blog to be reviewed and published. That happened. And then follow up with Oasis for the JSON RPC. What was the Oasis? I know about the Oasis JSON RPC stuff, but who was doing that? Was that James or?
James.
Okay, so we'll have to get in touch with him about that. Otherwise, I think that's all of the meeting items. Is there anything else? Okay, cool. Thanks everybody. See y'all in 2 weeks.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.